she split again. She just took off. But Shannon, she does call 911. Her call to dispatch evidently came in at 4:51 a.m. So this is 5 a.m. So she's been up all night, and she starts making statements that are, they're trying to kill me and they're after me. Now, obviously, the dispatcher, trying to figure out what's going on, asks, "Where are you?" At which point, it becomes very apparent that Shannon didn't know exactly where she was, and I mean not in just the specifics of what intersection you're at, but where on the island are you? Because she gave a completely different town or island name. She didn't really know where she was. She didn't pay attention, apparently. I have to guess.
Well, or she
was so loaded that, yeah. But what happens is, unfortunately, she gives a location that forces the dispatcher to transfer her call to a different dispatcher because of jurisdiction. In other words, she said she was basically in what amounts to another county. So another county's set of police had to take care of it.
That's weird. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's been a lot of criticism of this, and I to a point, I don't criticize the 911 dispatcher because they can only operate on the information that they're given.
Yeah.
True.
Yeah, you can. I mean, you can only do
so
as much as you can do with the information you have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're reliant upon that. But Shannon was on the phone with 911 for a total of 23 minutes before her call ended.
Yeah.
Long time.
Yeah, it's a very long call. Now, I know part of that, she was apparently on hold for several minutes between, when she was getting transferred. I know that accounts for part of it. But eventually her call ends. It doesn't sound like she just said, okay, bye. It sounds like the call just dropped. I'm guessing that based on the descriptions I've read. I haven't actually heard the tape because the tape isn't publicly available. Go figure. So it's hard to say exactly how she sounded. I've read accounts that vary. So anywhere from she was panicked to incoherent, or she was loaded versus being, stone cold sober. I've heard different descriptions of her state on that call. So I don't know. There's also talk that there were voices in the background. Now, was that Pac calling to her? Was that while she was at this one neighbor's house before she beat feet and got pinned down anywhere?
Maybe people were throwing their windows open and yelling at her to shut up.
Yeah, I mean, what's going on, lady? Cut it out. What's your deal? I mean, yeah, no idea. But what we do know is that she, like I said, she caused a whole bunch of calls to 911. The police ended up coming to the area, though it took them 45 minutes to respond. So people have criticized that, as people will always criticize response times.
Yeah, that's silly. I mean, it's silly. The police have a lot to do.
Yeah, especially in New York.
They're going to kind of triage that. I don't know if triage is the right word or not, but they're going to respond to the things that are most important to police. Probably saying, like, there's a crazy lady walking down our street yelling, doesn't take precedence
Probably
over,
doesn't.
like,
Yeah, I'm not getting her.
Shot.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
So, of course, by the time the cops get there, she's gone. The last people to see her were those residents that we know of, anyway, unless something else is going on here. But she was last seen, according to the residents, somewhere between Anchor Way, which was the street that Brewer lived on, and Larboard Court, which is an intersecting street several blocks down.
Mm-hmm.
That's the last we know of.
Yeah, these towns on that island, they're just basically one street. Little dinky towns.
Well, it's a suburb.
Yeah.
It's this where she was at was kind of a gated community suburb, so it really was very small. So it wasn't as if she could have gone just a massive distance in any way, shape, or form. Plus, she was on a long, narrow island.
Yeah.
A little itty-bitty barrier island.
It's a very skinny little island.
Shannon's story, officially in the narrative of the Long Island serial killer, ends there for a while. But I'm just going to go ahead and jump ahead in time and finish up the story of Shannon. Yeah, just to stay with her for the rest of this, because there's some here, and it'll help for when we get to everything else later on. The police had searched around Brewer's house, and they had searched in the surrounding area, and they kept looking around, but their search went east and west, because as we talked about, it's a narrow spit of an island. It's not very big.
To clarify, Brewer himself never called 911, nor did Pat, correct?
Correct.
It was just Shannon and then neighbors who didn't really know what was going on.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just wanted to clarify.
Yep. Nope.
That-
You're absolutely right.
Yeah, I can see why Brewer wouldn't do it. 'Cause as far as he was concerned, he handed her off to the driver, and it's like, not his problem.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what the police do is they start spreading east and west. Well, what you need to know is just to the east of Anchor Way and Larboard Court, there's a giant marsh. It's really big, and it extends all the way to Ocean Parkway, which is the east-west thoroughfare across the island, and then goes all the way to the Robert Moses Causeway, which is the main north-south route, which takes you through Fire Island and then eventually onto actually Long Island.
I'm sorry, I have one more.
Yeah.
When they started searching, you said kind of near Brewer's house. Were they searching near Brewer's house because they knew he was involved at that point, or were they searching in that neighborhood because that's where she had last been seen?
That was their last known place, because when she took off,
So by
Pat
the
didn't
time
know where she'd
They
gone.
started looking. The police had found out that she was at Brewer's and
Yeah.
that Pac was involved.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just wanted to clarify that as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's interesting timeline stuff.
Yeah, no, and the timeline on this is a little difficult. It's because, again, as we get farther in, there's going to be so much going on. But the vegetation in the marsh that I was talking about,
sorry.
it is, by all accounts, obscenely dense and very difficult to get through and navigate. And at this time of year, this is in the beginning or in the midst of the growing season. So the police couldn't actually search that, and they were like, listen, we can't go in there until it's the winter months. Now, she disappears in the middle of 2010. We're now going to jump forward to December of 2011, which is a year and a half later. They actually start... yeah, I know. Devin just gave me a funny look. Yeah, there's a huge disparity because they search, they can't do anything. Shannon's mom was a huge factor in the search continuing for her. And there's some other things that come up that then prompt the police to keep searching.
I'm willing to say I don't blame the dispatcher. I don't blame 911 for not showing up. But a year and a half, guys.
Well, it's, I don't know. It takes a long time to find bodies, it seems like.
So she disappeared in May.
But it's
and
not-
they said,
yeah.
okay, we've got to wait until things clear out. It's like, all right, so you wait those 6
wait.
months.
Yeah, but they had actually been searching, and they found some other stuff.
But no, they
Yeah.
didn't think that necessarily she had disappeared and died. She is not officially a missing person. She is an adult of her own means. She could very well have flagged a ride and driven away with somebody and said, you know what? I'm tired of living this life and I'm just moving on.
Okay.
They
that's fair.
don't know that.
Sometimes I forget that we're talking about adults here. You're right. Okay.
Okay.
So December 2011.
Right. So they go and they start searching through that marsh a year and a half later, and they start in there. They find her purse with her ID in it. They find her phone. They find her shoes and her jeans, and they keep going in, and eventually they find her very badly decomposed remains.
Yeah, 'cause year and a half in a March.
Exactly.
Sounds gross.
Yeah, well, and there's a lot of conjecture over her cause of death. The initial ruling is something that I haven't seen in a long time, which is death by misadventure and drowning. Death by misadventure is
To be
just a
honest
strange
with
way
you,
to call it.
That's what I want my cause of death to be. Death by misadventure.
Yeah.
I want mine to be death by a really awesome adventure.
Yeah, well, that's
That'd be-
misadventure.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. Either one works for me.
Solemnly swear I'm up to no good.
So because of the state of her body, there wasn't a whole lot to do testing on.
And how far away was her phone and her shoes and her jeans?
I
from her
don't
body?
have a distance. I mean, I know that it wasn't more than a mile in from where her stuff was found, that her body was found, but I've never plotted the exact distance.
Yeah,
it's not too far in.
But also, it's a marsh.
It's a marsh, that's the
living,
hard
breathing
part.
thing,
Yeah.
So it's gonna.
They were able to
Yeah.
find part of it because of the time of year, and it's affected by tides, so the water's coming up and down. So had they come in there, 6 or 8 hours later, they might not have found her remains. But
So they did some testing.
they did
probably.
testing because they were trying to figure out what's going on, and the initial ME, the medical examiner who worked on all of this, said that she didn't die of a drug reaction. And odd bit, supposedly she didn't have any drugs in her system, which is completely opposite of the whole thing that Brewer was saying.
Well, was there any soft tissue left?
Well, that's what I don't know how much soft tissue there was, and that might be why he says that, is that, it takes a long time for that stuff to be in such doses that you could find it in the harder cartilages and bones that are left over from a body.
Yeah.
So I'm presuming that there was a very minimal amount of soft tissue left, which is why the test didn't reflect any of it.
I would think she would have been just a skeleton, personally. I think everything out there would have been
So
nibbling
maybe
on her.
connective tissue.
Yeah.
Left
Yeah.
here or there, but anything that's worth testing is probably gone by then.
Yeah, and I believe that's probably why it came out the way it was. But a second review of the body was done, and that was, by the way, prompted by her mother, Mary, who had that done about a year or so later, I think it was, or several years actually. But the secondary review concluded that Shannon had died of strangulation, and that was based on damage that was done to one of the small bones in her neck. The problem is that that's not 100% positive proof, because at least one or two of the other bones that were directly next to that one were missing.
Yeah.
Like some small critter probably carried it away, or it sank into the muck, or who knows. So it's not ironclad that she was strangled.
Well, it seems unlikely, because out there in the middle of nowhere, in this posh little suburb kind of thing, somebody's just going to jump out of the bushes and choke her to death. I mean, maybe somebody wanted her to just shut the hell up.
Well, Joe, what this is getting at is that, based on what we're going to talk about in about 2 paragraphs continuing on, is this was an attempt to link her death to the other bodies that are found, and a number of those bodies, if not all, are believed to have been strangled.
Yeah.
So it's a bias. I consider it a bias. It's all these other ones were strangled, so look for signs of strangulation. Anything, this could indicate it, becomes, this is definitely an indicator of strangulation.
Yeah,
That's how that happened.
I don't buy it. I think, given her condition when last seen, she probably drowned herself. Accidentally, probably.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say. Death by misadventure is the most that I'm willing to commit to. I called Shannon the catalyst, because the events surrounding her disappearance are what causes a much more thorough search of the entire area, and that is what brings to everyone's attention all of the other bodies.
All the locals were really thrilled to find out. Some serial killer had been using them for a dumping ground.
Yeah, and by the way, Shannon still to this day is not. So I've said it was the Long Island serial killer, Gilgo Beach, whichever you want to call it. She is not officially considered one of the victims of this killer.
Rightfully so, because he did his killing elsewhere, and dumped the bodies there.
Well, and that's the thing, is that again, Mary was, I believe, trying to push for the idea of she was killed and then dumped there, just like the other bodies had been. But so that is the end of the Shannon, except that there is one bad bit of follow-up, which is that, sadly, as I was doing the research for this, which was about a month or so ago, that was about the time that, unfortunately, Mary died a violent death. Shannon's other sister, one of her other sisters, Sarah, apparently she's schizophrenic, was in an episode, and something happened, and Mary, I believe, was stabbed. And at this point,
what I heard. She was stabbed
last
multiple times.
I knew, Sarah was in custody. There's not a whole lot of details out there. It's a terrible thing for a family that already gone through all that frickin' tragedy and everything that had happened. But so that's why I wanted to kind of finish up with Shannon. So we're going to then move into the second chapter, which is the burlap victims.
All right.
So as we had talked about before, the police had been searching for Shannon, and they'd been looking in the area, and eventually, after a certain amount of time, they had to call off the search for her. Now, there's a police officer named John. I want to say the last name is pronounced Malia, but he was one half of a canine unit.
I'm thinking Malia.
Malia? What could be one of the two.
John.
But John was one half of a police unit. His partner was a German Shepherd named Blue.
Aww.
I'm pretty sure it's pronounced Blue.
Yeah.
And he knew about the search for Shannon. And he was pretty sure he had come to the conclusion that she wasn't going to be found alive. And he said, well, this is a great way to do some on-the-job training. This is the official story, by the way. So he was walking up and down the road in that area over the course of the summer and the fall of 2010. It could be that he just liked to walk the dog there, but he was using that officially as training to search for her while they were in that area. As winter months came, vegetation starts dying back. They can go farther and farther into where the vegetation used to be. And on the 11th of December 2010, Blue triggered on a site in the brush, which is just off the side of Ocean Parkway in Gilgo Beach. What Blue had found after digging just a little bit in the ground was the skeletal remains of a woman whose name was Melissa Barthélemy. And like I said, she was just a little bit under the surface, and her body was, shallow grave, and her body was wrapped in burlap.
Well, bodies are never found in deep.
Very intentional when they're found in deep graves, typically.
Yeah.
But so of course, obviously, the police swarm the area, and over the next 2 days, they start scouring the area, and they find 3 more bodies, each one wrapped in burlap, and the bodies belong to Maureen Brainerd Barnes, Megan Waterman, and Amber Lynn Costello.
And how far apart were the bodies?
They were pretty closely bunched.
Are we talking a few feet from each other?
I would say a few yards, if I remember correctly. But again, it's so many sites, because this is the first of several dump sites that we're going to go through. I believe that this was the tightest packed bunch. The next set that we're going to talk about were more spread about. Maureen was 25, and she had last been seen on the 9th of July, 2007.
She was 25 when she was seen in 2007?
Yes.
Okay.
Melissa was 24 and had been missing since the 10th of July, 2009. Megan was 22 and had been missing since the 6th of June, 2010. And Amber was 27 and had been missing since the 2nd of September, 2010.
And what else do these women have in common?
Well, there's actually quite a few commonalities. All 4 were prostitutes. They apparently had all been using Craigslist to advertise their services. I've read that all but Maureen had also been using another website, which is called Backpage, which I'd never heard of and never used, but what I understand is it's very similar to Craigslist. I went to Backpage thinking, oh God, I'm going to get a virus on my computer. Turns out it's just a listing site, just like Craigslist is.
Oh, so it's not just devoted to sex?
Correct.
Prostitution stuff?
Yep,
Okay.
Amber was at the time a known heroin user, and it's believed that all of the women at the time were using most likely cocaine. Maybe not habitually, but they were cocaine users. Probably also using marijuana, which, it's the business. It lends itself to that.
Oh, yeah.
They all
it's
had...
also just, it doesn't matter.
Yeah. They all were very physically similar, and that kind of gives us an idea that maybe whoever was doing this had a type, because they also were all very similar. They were all under 5 feet 6 inches tall, or 167 centimeters, or 16.5 hands, and about 110 pounds, which is equivalent to about 50 kilograms, or 7.85 stones, or less. And they were all blonde at the time, or at least had blonde in their hair, so highlights, stuff like that. And like I said, this is pointed to as something to say that whoever did this had a quote-unquote type.
Okay. Although I wouldn't say so much about the height, because I think, isn't the average height of a North American female woman like 5'4"?
Well, some of these ladies most of them were 5'6" and under. Mm-hmm. So most of them, actually, several of them, I think it was like 4'10" to 5'2". Yeah. So they were all, it wasn't as if there was a 5'9" tall woman in the mix.
And they were all under 110 pounds.
Right. Very, very thin.
You don't
thin
want
builds.
Actually, if you want to find a woman and strangle her and overpower her, you don't want to be tackling some 6-foot Amazon, probably.
That's true.
Yeah.
We need to not go in his basement. He says things like that with too much confidence. It really scares the crap
really
out of me.
But for reference, right? I'm 5'2", and I don't weigh 110 pounds.
Right.
And I don't think I'm searching for compliments here. I'm a slim person.
Yes.
And so, for reference, if you subtract pounds from me, even 10 pounds, even if I'm 120 pounds, like that's a tiny person, and then add a couple inches to me, those are really like
pretty
slim
skinny.
women.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very slim.
And if you have an average male, I think the average male in this country is 5'9" and 180 pounds. Is that 60 to 80? I think I'm ballparking here.
Yeah.
But that it's not hard to overpower somebody who is that much shorter and that much lighter than you. So the point is, it is pointing out that maybe there was a type.
and really, 16 and a half hands is just like, psh.
Yeah. And I had mentioned this a little bit when we were talking about Shannon, is that these women were all, their cause of death was all strangulation.
These women all.
Yes, so that's why I brought that up when we were talking about the secondary examination of Shannon's body.
Yeah, and Shannon, of course, was not found in burlap, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Now, all these women, when they disappeared, they just evaporated. They were gone, with the exception of Melissa, because 1 week after her disappearance, her 15-year-old sister, Amanda, started getting calls from her cell phone.
But it wasn't Melissa.
But it wasn't Melissa, and she received I think it's a total of 8 calls, and it happened over the course of about a month and a half. And this caller got slowly more and more aggressive, and it's reported to have been playing with her. That's what the reporting will always refer to it as.
Melissa's the one who disappeared in 2009?
Yes.
Okay. I mean, I'm just thinking, like, why would she do that, right? And I guess in my estimation, 2009, I'm trying to think, I think I had, like, an iPhone.
Most people had.
The second
Yeah.
iPhone. I mean, it wasn't smartphone mania,
But everybody had a cell.
yeah,
At that point, cells
I'm
were
just
everywhere.
Thinking, like, do you think Melissa had, like, a picture of her 15-year-old sister's face?
Well, but it could be as simple as little sister Amanda was what it said in her phone book.
Yeah.
Could have said that, or it could have been that he kept her alive for a while and just got some information out of
Yeah,
her.
I don't know. And what we do know is that we're pretty sure that it wasn't just some random crank because of the things that the caller said.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the caller always got off the phone within 3 minutes, so calls were not traceable. But they do say that, well, they couldn't get him to a specific exact address.
sorry.
I know, and
Such
we're
a
gonna,
movie thing.
we're gonna talk about that shortly.
Okay.
But they tracked some calls to Times Square, but obviously nothing happened about it, because as the police rushed into Times Square looking around for somebody on their cell phone, they saw everybody.
Was on their cell phone.
Yeah,
So-
they specifically ran into all the porn shops.
They
but
did.
I understand there's a lot of porn shops in Times Square. So.
I didn't know this, but apparently, according to this, yeah. Or at least enough for the police to be like, oh, yeah, it's this one, that one, this one is where you're going to go. I don't know. But the reason I said that we know that this person couldn't have just been some random crank is that on I think it was the last call, the killer made the caller, I should say, not the killer, but the caller made the statement of, "I'm watching your sister's body rot."
Such a wonderful thing to say to her little
15-year-old
sister.
girl.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
now the-
Clean living, yeah.
Let's be real. Anybody who strangles prostitutes, probably not like the cream of the crop.
Probably not exactly the most compassionate
Right.
person out
That's a
there.
good point.
Yeah.
Very good
And
point.
actually, I guess I have one point of clarification, because I know we're drawing to the end of this chapter, but do you know, you may not know this may not be public knowledge, but the bodies that were wrapped in burlap, were they wrapped in burlap when they were totally together and then they rotted in the burlap, or did they have some measure?
Did they decompose and then get thrown into the burlap and then thrown in the ground?
or were they like totally bodies and
I-
do you know?
I don't know for sure. I've gotten the impression from all of the stuff that's out there that the bodies were wrapped in burlap upon their dumping, and the reason that I think that is the newest body, she'd only been missing since September, and this is December, so that's 2 or 3 months,
yeah.
and she was in burlap. So I have to presume that they were in the burlap when they were put in the ground, and it's the way I understand it is that though they were deposited at different times, they were in the burlap when they were put into the ground, and they would have been relatively fresh. But that's a supposition on my part based on all the stuff that I've
I
read.
guess that's my question, right? Is because if she was getting all these calls and they were going on for like a month, and the caller at the end of the month said, "I'm watching your sister's body."
The sicko's got her in a back room somewhere just staring. Yeah.
Watching it rot.
Yeah,
and then wrapped in the. But I mean, it's not really that important. It's
No.
just interesting.
But
Yeah, I don't know.
what I'm interested in knowing is the police are trying to trace these calls. Did they record the calls? I mean, you would think they would.
Oh, likely, but why would they ever release those to the public?
Well,
Especially since
I
it's
could think
an
of a-
unsolved case.
I could think of a great reason to release them to the public.
You might release tidbits.
Well, and no, you don't have to release everything, but at least some ones that don't give away critical information. Because if we had it all over the TV news and the radio, somebody might recognize the voice.
That's true.
It just seems like kind of an obvious thing to do.
That I will disagree with that because I have heard so many people on the phone who sounded like other people I knew. I mean, you know, I worked in a
see
call
that.
center, and
No, and we
Oh, yeah.
get that a lot.
Yeah.
Like, people will be like, oh, Steve is obviously this dude from this other radio show, and we're like, no,
Yeah.
what?
or what's his name from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia,
Yeah.
or Joe. Joe is the one who gets it. You, sir, would be in jail so fast if they put those out because everybody says you sound like everybody else
Yeah.
I know.
with any
I know.
kind of baritone voice. So,
Yeah, I know. I'm thinking like more like somebody who knows somebody really well. Like if you know, you work with them every day. And I'm just saying that they're totally obviously at a dead end on this.
And I
would
think
say
that
that would be a
that's a
good Hail
trap.
Mary. That would be a good Hail Mary play.
I think
you know?
believing that is a trap that you are setting yourself up for a whole bunch of legwork.
Oh yeah,
not,
you're gonna
which
get
is why they
tons of-
never do
You're
it.
gonna get a lot of false leads
Yeah,
for sure.
yeah.
But I'm just saying, if they really want to solve this, I think that's about the only way they're going to be able to do it.
It's time for Chapter 3. Chapter 3 I've titled The Dismembered Victims.
Yep.
And I think that it probably goes without saying that upon the discovery of the 4 bodies in Burlap, the news media went guano crazy
Oh yeah.
and swarmed the area.
And they're probably like, sort of like, prompted a lot more searching.
Oh yeah, it did prompt more searching, but it also they put out there that it was all caps obvious that
Yeah.
there was a serial killer at work here.
Well, yeah, I would
And-
say so.
This forced the cops, as you're saying, to kind of step up their game, and they kept looking around. Much like the issue with Shannon, the cops had to stop for part of the growing season, and then in the winter months they would start to do their stuff again. But so
They probably had to stop for, like, bad weather, too.
bad weather. When was Sandy came? No, this was before Sandy came through.
This was in 2010.
And 2011 is when we're moving into.
Yeah,
but yes,
Sandy was 2012.
Yeah,
it was December 2011, 2012. I know because I wasn't here.
okay.
He was there for Sandy? How was it?
Windy.
A non-event where I was.
Oh, good.
So the police kept searching, and after the initial discovery, they had to wait a couple of months, and then so again that initial discovery was December 2010. We move into March of 2011.
When things are defrosting.
When things are defrosting, and the police start their search on the 29th of March, and depending on the source, either that very day or the following day, they found a partial set of remains, and that was a head, hands, and forearms.
Ugh, yeah.
And those, by the way, were linked to the torso of a body of a woman named Jessica Taylor. She, by the way, these parts were not wrapped in burlap. Jessica was also a prostitute.
And the torso had already been found, right?
Torso had been found. The torso had been found in 2003 on the 26th of July in the town of Manorville, New York, which it's like 10 or 12 miles away from Gilgo Beach. Ballpark as the crow flies.
The parts they found, were they...
And I mean,
Yeah, they were partial remains.
8 years?
The state of them is not listed, but I would imagine that after that amount of time, we're basically talking about skeletal remains.
I think it's fair to say that anytime the police say partial remains, they just mean too gruesome for public consumption.
Probably.
Yeah, for most of us, the whole idea of chopping up a dead body is,
Blah.
kind of unthinkable.
Yep, let's
Yeah.
not... Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go. Let's move on.
Okay, so we're going to move on to the 4th of April of 2011, at which point 3 more bodies are found. These bodies are found deeper in the brush off the side of the road, and they are also not wrapped in burlap. Like Jessica, one of the sets of remains found that day were partial. They were also linked to an unknown woman's torso that was found in Manorville, on the 19th of November 2000.
Well, I kind of wonder what this did to the property values out there.
In Manorville or
Well,
Gilgo Beach?
Both of them.
Yeah, no, it didn't do good things for either of them. One of the other bodies was the identity is unknown, but the body was determined to be that of an Asian man who was wearing women's clothing. And the last body to be found was that of a toddler who was wrapped in a blanket, and her identity is yet unknown. They were, it's terrible to point out, but again, not entirely intact based on how long they had been there.
But, that could have just been animals, tearing
Animals,
apart.
wave action, everything like that. We don't know if they were scattered intentionally or just over time.
But they were all in a pretty close proximity.
They were all at a very close radius, yes. Yeah. So
we got we got the 4 burlaps, we got the 2 torso murders.
well, we've got 4 sets of remains. No, we got 4 burlaps. Yeah. We then have an additional 4 sets of remains that are found.
Yeah.
Part of those are the torsos that were tied to the Manorville, to Manorville's torsos.
Yeah, and am I counting wrong? So I think there's 2 torsos.
So don't do your math now, Joe. We're not done. We're not done. Stop
okay,
that. I can see where you're going when you're counting on your fingers. I know what you're doing.
Yeah.
Because we're.
Sorry, I was just gonna say at some point we will do a live taping of podcast, probably.
So people can see what a cluster it is?
And it will mostly so that everybody can see the faces that I... Sometimes, people are like, you're so insensitive, but, if you could see the, faces that we all make when we're talking about this, you understand that,
one of us just forges through and keeps talking and
God, it's awful.
So we're okay. So
we're not done yet, though.
Yeah, we've got the Asian man and the toddler. On the 11th of April, 2 more sets of remains are found farther down the beach. One set was a set of human bones in a plastic bag, and the other was just a skull. The skull. The skull would later be connected to a pair of severed legs that were found in April of 1996 on Fire Island to the east.
So, but the skull and the legs were never connected to any other body parts?
Well, originally they were, before they were separated from one another.
I would think every time you found a set of body parts, out there on the island, you would just directly go over to Manorville and start looking for the torso to connect it with.
Maybe.
Yeah, that's not a bad point. But the skull and the legs that it was eventually connected to were run through DNA testing. By the way, the identity of that individual is unknown, and that was then connected and determined to be the mother of the toddler that was found on the 4th of April.
You guys asked for this story.
What? Oh.
I just want to remind our listeners that you guys asked.
Oh, yeah. Now, I did a bunch of reading for links that weren't focused on the Craigslist or the prostitution angle, and I came across some accounts from the families of the identified victims, so of these now, not counting Shannon, 10 bodies that we've come across, and it turns out that the ones that have been identified just as a kind of a global, what is their connections, they were all prostitutes at one point,
probably
or at some point.
Toddler, though.
Yeah, probably not the toddler. And it's not a lot that all of these women were on drugs, like we kind of know that the first 4 were. But you'll see that brought up in the reading. You'll also see heroin brought up in the reading. So it's a very close circle of these things, but there's not a whole lot. It's not as if they all worked for, say, the same pimp or something like that.
Yeah.
So it's very hard to tie them all together.
Well.
I also, this is really, you ever read something as you're doing reading or research and you're like, I've never heard that phrase before and I kind of wish I never had? And I came across the phrase, the missing.
Which is one of the most heartbreaking things. I've seen this before.
I hadn't.
To be honest with you, when I see this in research, I stop researching the case. Because I can't, it's too
much.
Too much for me.
For people who don't know, the missing are people who don't have anyone close enough to them to notice that they are gone to file a missing persons report. So they have just disappeared from the face of the earth and nobody, close enough to notice and report it.
Or notices and just assumes they went somewhere else.
Yeah. Yeah.
Quite possible.
It's God, that's so sad to me.
Yeah,
And I'm sure that that's an ideal victim for a serial killer.
Yeah. No, I mean, there's certain demographics that are focused upon.
Yeah, and especially prostitutes, because obviously that's an easy.
It's a dangerous lifestyle.
Well, it's easy to get a prostitute to to climb into your car with you or come and meet you somewhere.
Or drug addicts a lot.
Yeah.
You know, you say, oh yeah, no, come with me. I'll take you to where we can get some drugs.
Yeah, I
And
can
that's
read it, yeah.
the hard part, is that, and I you know what, we talked about this a little bit in the last story, is I don't want to sound like I'm bashing anybody.
Murders.
Yeah, like in that story, I openly admit that I had an issue with somebody. In this, I'm not intending to come across as bashing anybody. There are just a million reasons that someone gets into that lifestyle, and I'm not saying anything against it. It's a choice. It's not always a choice, actually. So
Bad choice. Well, sometimes people are forced into it.
yeah, so it's really hard to try and put a finger on any of it.
Yeah.
But let's move away from that, because I would just want to finish up before we get into theories what Joe started asking about before, which is the count. If you've kept count, including Shannon, I am at 11 bodies.
Yeah, but Shannon should not be included, though.
But I did at the beginning say that there was 12 or more.
Yeah.
And I did that on purpose because when you read the reporting,